Every single year, there are undervalued players in drafts who emerge as weekly starters or better relative to what they were drafted to be, whether it's Zach Bond, Diane Henley, Jonathan Cooper, or Quentin Lake. All last year, there will always be IDPs who outperform their draft stock and surprise us. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. I'm John Macri, and for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition, presented by Yahoo Fantasy, we are talking 2025 IDP sleepers, so let's get it. All right, IDP sleepers are on the menu today. We're going to be going over the defensive players who we believe are currently being undervalued in drafts, making them prime values to target in 2025. And joining me to do so, a very valuable man in his own right from fantasypoints.com, the great Justin Barnes is here. Justin, what is up, man?
Jeezy McKeezy. Good to see you and talk to you. It feels like it's been 4 years, but it's probably more like 4 months. But yeah, things are good, man. I got to be honest with you. I've been riding high ever since we did this podcast last year. I got one guy right, and let's not worry about the rest of them. I got Brandon Jones. He ended up being halfway decent, and I've just decided I'm just going to ride that high. I decided to get one right this year. I'm going to ride that same high again. That's all I'm at for. I just want to hit 20%. I got 5 guys. If I can get one right, I'm going to gloat about it on Twitter all day long.
Right. Yeah. You could come up with one of those threads. Last year, I told you about Brandon Jones, and
just don't dig through my other tweets.
No, yeah.
For 75 other players. Right?
Yeah. Like I wish I went back and I can't remember the names that we had even last year, but I mean, look, we do this every year now. It's been a few years of doing this, and there's always these players that we're trying to pick out that are going later in drafts. Some of them are going to hit, some of them aren't, but I think the point is they don't cost much, right? And they're low risk, basically. We're spending very little on them, but we're hoping that they hit big, like a Brandon Jones last year, guys like Zach Bond and players like that. And those are the kind of guys that we're going to identify today, and we have been for the past few years. So I'm excited to get into it. Before, though, I get it, go any further here, I do have to remind everybody that the NFL preseason is happening right now, and we are so close to the 2025 season kicking off in September, and we're going to use the IDP fantasy report again, bringing every single bit of IDP relevant information to you on a weekly basis as the big tool to help you win your IDP league. So right now, while fantasy leagues are drafting and firing up here, all of you IDP listeners are well aware that we've been putting in months of prep here to get you ready for this part of the season. A ton of work has gone into making sure that we cover as much as possible so that you're locked, loaded, and ready for your drafts in week 1 and beyond. So with PFF Plus, you can save $20 when you lock in by August 18th, just $99.99 for a limited time. That is $8.33 a month. You will get full access to PFF Plus for a year, so you can dominate your leagues and or smash bets from week 1 through the 2026 NFL draft. From draft to championship, PFF Plus helps you manage your roster with confidence. Start, sit, waiver wires, trade value, all of that stuff. And as you all know, that means you get access to the player grades and can dive into defensive player usage, snap counts, and all of that fun stuff that we talk about all the time on this show that you can't get anywhere else, right? So that, again, includes the IDP fantasy report for weekly breakdowns of every single defensive player's usage, my thoughts on it all, including waiver targets, team man and zone coverage rates, everything that I could fit into one weekly article to serve as a go-to for the hardcore IDP gamers, along with everything else we offer here at PFF. So PFF Plus early bird deal ends August 18th. Do not miss out on this. Go to subscribe.pff.com and use code earlybird. All right.
Real quick, John.
Yeah, of course.
I got to tell you, I read that article every week.
Oh, thank you.
I really do. I get all my research together, and then I always just put it up next to the stuff that you've got. It's an incredible resource. I really do use it every week. So, and I'm not getting paid for that advertisement. I just want to tell you all that there's so much. I don't even know how you've packed all that gold in there, but it's just like it's the most efficient way to just get a very quick view of IDP talent. It's awesome. I read it every week.
That means a ton to me. So I really do appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, I'm always surprised that anybody reads any of my work, but knowing that you're relying on it as well, like that just means so much more, right? And yeah, a lot of work goes into it, but I think we've kind of streamlined the process. I've gotten a little quicker at putting it all together and not losing much information every week, but it's a fun one to do. It's a lot of work, and I'm glad that so many people get enjoyment out of it and find it helpful more than anything, being the key, right? So thank you. I really do appreciate you saying that. So yeah, we're going to dive into our IDP sleepers today. And what we're going to do, we're going to dive into the IDP show ADP and find players who are currently being drafted outside the top 24 at their positions at edge, defensive tackle, linebacker, safety, often much later than that as well, outside the top 24, and guys who we think can emerge as like serviceable starters for us at the very least. But I think we can look for even much higher ceiling than that. You can check out the IDP show's ADP over at the idpshow.com as well, as so much more over there. So make sure you go support those fine gentlemen as well. But with that, we can now get into our first picks. And let's start this time at linebacker, Justin, because already through training camp and what I'm sure will be reinforced in the preseason usage, we've already seen changes to green dot signal callers who were, maybe different than what we would have assumed even like a month ago. But now we have some potential full-time players. And let's start with one of your picks here, because this is one of those players for me now that I've had to adjust expectations for this season in a good way. And that's Mack Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. So tell us about him.
Yeah, I mean, if you want linebacker tackles, you have to just amass as many snaps as you can. It's literal reps, right? And so what we see is somebody from that Arizona linebacking core has to be on the field every down, and it looks more and more week in and week out at training camp that is Mack Wilson. He is wearing the green dot. So when we look at that, there's just no way he's not going to see a lot of snaps on this, what should look like a mediocre defense, let's say, or an average defense, right? And there's a chance that they could be a bad defense and log a ton of snaps, and he's going to be there in the middle. I mean, I see him like he's like, I think he's LB 62. He's in the 60s for the ADP, for the IDP show ADP. And he's going to be in every down live. I mean, if he stood still in the middle of the defense, he would get 90 tackles, right? Just literally by not moving. So he's going to get 120 tackles just by standing, just by moving around a little bit. And I mean, who's going to take those snaps from him? Akeem Davis-Gaither. We've seen what Akeem Davis-Gaither is. He certainly has talent. He has been given the opportunity to be an every down linebacker for Cincinnati. That did not work. That did not stick, and they let him go and they moved on. So I don't see him as some sort of threat as an every down source. He's not going to just magically be consistently good. He's good, but he's certainly up and down. So, and even if he is, there's still plenty of snaps for Wilson as long as he's wearing that green dot. He's going to be a solid LB2 or LB3 at worst, and he's going as like I mean, he's basically going undrafted for the most part. So, and you mentioned Zach Ball, and Zach was one of the guys that I had on my list last year, just simply based on we watched training camp and we watched we get the reports from the beat writers, and it's just when it keeps stacking up, like we thought there's no way Zach Bond's going to stick as an every down linebacker, but the reports just keep pouring in, and at some point you can't ignore them. And luckily, a lot of your league mates are ignoring them. I think Mack Wilson's going to be a perfectly servable, he's going to land somewhere in the 15 to 30 range as a linebacker, and he's basically free right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm glad you included Wilson on this list, because he's an IDP who I didn't like at all last season because of his role, right? He was basically playing the non-full-time version of what Frankie Louvu does in Washington, and he was much less effective, right? So with the same coaching staff this year, them bringing in Akeem Davis-Gaither in free agency, it made sense to me that Wilson would remain in that same role, but this is where we kind of get to pivot, right? By paying attention to training camp and the preseason, because Wilson has made the shift from that role last year, like you said, and it's likely going to be that traditional middle linebacker role and wearing the green dot, right? So this really reminds me a lot of like Zach Bond last year, because Zach Bond had like a similarly poor usage role, like on the edge, part-time, like previously to before going over to Philadelphia, right? But Mack Wilson was doing it just in the same defense as he is this year. So this is huge for his IDP potential, obviously, because like even though he wasn't great for us last year at IDP, like we can reset expectations now in 2025 with a completely different deployment and role. Like this was a role that I thought Akeem Davis-Gaither was going to play just because of Mack Wilson's role last year, but now Davis Gaither at least becomes a question mark for me. We'll see how he gets used in the preseason, but there's at least a good chance that even if he starts, it's not a full-time role. So this puts Mack Wilson in place as like the Cardinals linebacker that we'll want to target in IDP right now. And that could change throughout the season and if the role changes. But as of right now, as preseason week 1 is going on, as we speak, Wilson is the guy that we should be targeting. And if that means swapping him as an ad drop for, any Akeem Davis-Gaither managers, then it's a pivot we'll have to make, right? And it could also still work out for Akeem Davis-Gaither if he's a full-time player along with Wilson. That's possible as well. So it's not like it's full panic mode for Davis-Gaither, but to be safe, if you can make that pivot, then I'd be fine to do so for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something really important, which is that, particularly for this podcast, for what we're trying to find is basically diamonds in the rough, right? You want to use the fact that a player from last year wasn't in the same role that they're going to be in now, and how much of a change and impact that will be. And we cited Zach Bond, right? Zach Bond, quote unquote, came out of nowhere because people had already sized him up.
Mm-hmm.
They've already drafted him the couple of years before, and he just wasn't doing anything. And so many people bring that information to this to this year's draft. And so we're looking for people like that. And Mack Wilson's one of them. The guy you've got on your list, to me, it fits the exact same mold. I actually think he's in a better position than Mack Wilson.
Yeah, so this is another one, right? Where again, last year, like you said, wasn't really relevant for us all that much outside of like really deep leagues. And that's Nate Landman of the Los Angeles Rams. And this Rams linebacker core, it was a pretty ambiguous one, like coming out of free agency in the NFL draft, because there weren't really any established starters or like clear young stars at the position that they've invested highly in. So for me, it kind of made sense that maybe it would be Troy Reeder that would get first crack at calling the plays on the defense and be the full-time guy, because he was the lone player on the roster with that exact experience from the past for the Rams. But again, we pivot as new information comes out, and that's what the preseason and training camp is all about, right? So for the Rams, they look to be trusting Nate Landman, a new acquisition for them coming over from former Rams coaching staff, Raheem Morris's Atlanta Falcons. And Landman has been used in IDP, are useful in IDP as recently as 2023 and last year for really deep leagues, like I said, because he wasn't a full-time player. But again, like you said too, past fantasy production for our IDPs matters much less when we get a completely new role and new team, especially for our linebackers. And Landman is in a great position to play a full-time role, most likely in a great defense for tackle efficiency, as McVay and company ran a top 5 rate of zone coverage last season under Chris Shula as the defensive coordinator. And I think we should expect much more of the same, most likely. And, last year, Landman was also an above average tackler when it came to tackles versus expected. So we have seen him deliver above average tackle efficiency. And that, like, if he continues to do that in this role on this defense, like that could be really huge for just how much he outperforms his current ADP evaluation.
Yeah, I think that zone heavy scheme is a crucial part of this. I will talk to a lot of people about, you'll have these great middle linebackers and they look like they're doing nothing for fantasy, and they're in a super like man heavy scheme. And the bottom line is they're doing their role well. It just isn't producing. It's like, you can't fault Layden Johnson because he's not giving you fantasy points if that's not his role. He can, right? And then if you move a player, or it's like a tight end who is in line and basically not running a lot of routes, and then he moves to a new team and they decide, look, we want to get this guy involved in the passing game. Well, then there's that big role or scheme change that you're looking for, because so many of these players are the difference in talent from for these linebackers, these starting linebackers. It's not as wide as you might think. And so just putting someone in an every down role in the middle of the defense where their role is to clean up tackles, to get into some lanes, et cetera, then naturally they're just, it's going to boost their production, even if they just kind of have like an average season. And that's what we're looking for here. These players who are, I don't think any of these guys we're mentioning are going to be top 5 linebackers. They could be, a few things go the right way, but the bottom line is the let's assume the Roquan Smiths are off the table, and you're looking at your LB2 or LB3, and these guys are just sitting there with, like I said, 110 to 150 tackles probably sitting in front of them as long as they stay healthy. So and like I said, if I was sitting in a draft and I had Landman and Wilson right next to each other, I would probably go with Landman first. I just think he's got more up. I think he has a higher floor and higher ceiling. But these are players who are really getting bypassed by at an insane amount.
Yeah, and it's a great point, like you said, right? Like these are guys that can be locked in starters for us every week as long as they're full-time players on their respective defenses. And it gives us a chance, like for 2025 drafts, like we could load up on the upside players on offense at running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, right? And it could save us from having to spend too much of an investment on our linebackers and our IDPs in particular, right? Or spending on the IDPs that we know we won't be able to just pick up super late in drafts, right? The high end edge rushers, for example. So I think we got a few good names here that can absolutely play that role for us in our drafts this season. And next up, we have another pick from your end, and really interesting because last year, like he was one of the more like overvalued players in IDP for me, right? And now, after kind of failing to live up to expectations, you've included him on the list here of potential values in 2025. So what do you like about Patrick Queen of the Pittsburgh Steelers this season?
Well, it's a lot of what you just said. He was so overvalued, and I was one of the people who overvalued. I was like, he's just got, like a lot of the kind of the same stuff that we're saying here. He should just be sitting, and it's always weird with the Steelers that they have a weird relationship with their linebackers. It seems like nobody ever plays every down for them. And that was a word of caution going into last year. But to me, there's a very emotional attachment to how his season started. He, in his first 2 weeks, let's say you drafted Patrick Queen and you drafted him as your LB1 or even your LB2. Mm-hmm. Over the first 2 weeks, Patrick Queen had 6 total tackles, right? And imagine that you started that week 0-2. No one is drafting Patrick Queen again, right? So that was a brutal start. Mm-hmm. And he had a couple of other slow games, but from week 3 on, in balanced scoring, he was a high-end LB2, back-end LB1. I mean, he after that settled into like a 7 to 10 tackle guy. He did not have a lot of big plays, and so maybe that'll get better. But what I noticed is it seemed like he caught on to that defense. This is conjecture, right? But the sense I got was that he started to catch on to the defense better. It might have been that they were like, well, look, he's not really ready for this yet. Although he played a ton of snaps early on, he just wasn't getting tackles. Whatever that reason, that did go away. And although we had a couple of duds later, and this is also one of those things, every linebacker has duds. And it doesn't mean that, first of all, maybe they had a bad game. Everybody's allowed to have a bad game. But also just sometimes it's just blind luck. Sometimes 15 tackles in a game is blind luck. And sometimes 4 tackles in a game is also blind luck, right? So the next time he had like a slow game and he only had 1 or 2 more, I think fantasy managers looked at that as like confirmation bias that he's this guy who's only got to get him 4 tackles. I think across the board, he ended up being a really solid player. I'm not saying take him early, but he's going late. ADP has him as LB28. I'm totally fine to take Patrick Queen as an LB2 because I think if he can repeat what he did from week 3 on, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't finish in the top 12, maybe or at least in the top 15.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and right, it's kind of the thing with Queen, right, where he does get a lot of opportunity to deliver as a top 12 linebacker, so he's absolutely capable of getting there, like you said, because he's on the field, and he should be able to deliver tackles, right? But yeah, he's always kind of had this thing. I don't know what is going on with him. Whether it's sometimes it's poor play, it's playing out of position. A lot of the times it's missed tackles as well. Like that's been a big issue for him. Like every year, if you filter to like the 50% or linebackers that have played at least 50%, he's among the top 12 at his position at the very least in missed tackle rate. But he's always playing a ton of snaps as well. So there's enough volume there for me where, yeah, LB28, like, look, I like Peyton Wilson, so I'm always going to root for Peyton Wilson to kind of come in and take over that LB1 role, or at least lessen Queen's role. But like, I agree that I think he at least feels more appropriately priced right now, and as long as he continues to play in a similar role, like he'll likely outperform his current value, as much as it hurts me to say as a Peyton Wilson fan, and somebody who's not a big fan of Patrick Queen. But at LB28, like those are the kind of guys that you're looking for, where they're full-time players, and there's going to be less than full-time players that I think will end up going ahead of him too, just on the hope from people. So you're going to get a full-time player in Patrick Queen, again, assuming Peyton Wilson doesn't take over as soon as this year. But yeah, another chance for him to kind of outperform his value this year.
And let's zero in on that LB28 because that was the number that made me add him to this list.
Yeah.
I think if he just does okay, he's going to end up probably a mid-level LB2. LB28 means you're drafting him as your LB3.
Mm-hmm.
I like him as my LB3. I would love him as my LB4. That said, I'm not taking him as my LB2. I'm waiting. If he happens to be there and I'm at my third or fourth linebacker and I've got some gun-shy fantasy managers who remember the beginning of that season and I'm watching him fall, then I'm pulling the trigger at LB3 or LB4. I'm not, however, pulling the trigger at LB2.
Right. Yeah, I think that's perfect. That makes perfect sense for me as well. And I'm pretty sure that's in where I'd have him ranked as well this season. I have him in that kind of high-end LB3 range or mid-range LB3 if I remember correctly. But yeah, exactly around that spot. But all right, one more linebacker for me, and another situation where we're looking to make IDP managers and drafters aware of a new name to target as things kind of change and evolve around the league. So I've included Christian Rozeboom on the list today, which I know at least one listener is going to be hyped about. Shout out Paper Abyss Comics. He's been hoping for Rozeboom to be featured in an episode for a while now. So with Josie Jewell getting cut, like it looks like we are going to get the boom here in 2025, because Rozeboom went from being a potential part-time player on this defense to not wearing to now wearing the green dot for Carolina with Jewell release. So that is a huge value boost and one that we can definitely get behind for all league formats. Really, like we got a decent dose of Rozeboom with the Rams last year, and to his credit, he was really productive. Like strong tackle efficiency, finished 98th percentile in tackles versus expected on fewer than 900 defensive snaps last year, and he finished the season as a top 20 IDP linebacker for our scoring. And the best part is that he did that while averaging just 74% of his team's defensive snaps. So it was really inconsistent usage for Rozeboom last year in LA. There were weeks when he played every snap, and then he dipped back down to like 65 to 75% of snaps. So there was, I think, a lot more untapped potential with Rozeboom that we could have gotten last year, if only for a true full-time workload. And now it really looks like we're going to get that full-time workload because he's wearing the green dot and because of the lack of options at the position in Carolina. So all of a sudden, like, we got a guy who is being drafted as like LB 61. If he's getting drafted at all, we could get some massive production from Rozeboom this season, and he costs nothing to acquire. Very similar to, again, Zach Bond last year, those types of guys. So I am absolutely in on Christian Rozeboom right now. I'll have him ranked probably in the LB2 range, low end LB2. I think he could be even better than that. Obviously, again, if things go right and based on his efficiency, but at the very least, we're getting a full-time player here if he can hold that role for the season. So worth betting on at a very low price in drafts right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important aspects of that is the team cutting Josie Jewell. I mean that
Yeah.
they cut Josie Jewell, they give Rozeboom the green dot. Those two in sequence tells you that the coaching staff they feel so strongly that Rozeboom has this that they're not worried about keeping the veteran there. So those are clear signs that this is likely not going to be a waffling situation. If they didn't think he was capable of this, they probably wouldn't have cut Jewell, or they would have signed, after cutting Jewell, they would have picked up a veteran linebacker just for insurance. So just those two things to me stacked back to back. Experience in this tells me almost every time that's happened, it's because the coaching staff clearly thinks this is the guy and this is the guy they're going to run with. So why not take advantage of that?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like I think Trevin Wallace would have been in the mix, right? He had the draft capital with this team. Christian Rozeboom, a new signing, undrafted free agent from like 2022, and he at least has NFL experience, right? And that must have shown in camp at some point for them to feel comfortable with him. And obviously, Trevin Wallace still got a little room to grow, so it makes perfect sense for me. And yeah, happy to grab him, especially at the price that he's being drafted at right now, or basically not being drafted at. So we'll go on to the other positions, but before we do go on any further, I want to let you all know that this episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. There is never a better reminder of that than the presence of the NFL preseason, which is always accompanied by the many, many fantasy football drafts that we take part in every year. And this year, Nate and I are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've mentioned it before, but I love playing on Yahoo because they not only let me play 5 separate IDP positions, but they also have the super fun rating system, just adding to the competitiveness that goes along with playing fantasy football. And honestly, it gives me an extra sense of achievement holding like a diamond rating and maintaining that status every year. It's just a nice added touch by Yahoo that you don't get anywhere else. So to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. So with the season right around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoo.com or yahoofantasy.com/PFF. That is yahoofantasy.com/PFF. All right, we just talked about one Carolina Panthers player, and now as we transition over to the defensive backs, let's start things off with another Panthers player. Justin, you've gone with safety Lathan Ransom for your DB sleeper pick.
Yeah, raise your hand if you've drafted Lathan Ransom in redraft or best ball. Because if you raise your hand, you might be lying. I haven't seen him drafted at all, and I know he hasn't been assured the starting safety position, and it might even take a little while to get there. But from the reports that I've read, he's definitely run with the ones. He's been playing well, and I think they want him to take over that position. So maybe it doesn't happen week one. This is a pretty deep pick, but what we saw from the Panthers last year is they ran I think about 75% zone, which is is about average, but certainly something that's not going to necessarily hurt your safeties. I believe the pairing of Ransom with his skill set and his safety partner, which would be Trayvon Merrick, I think this is set up to where, although they will probably do a good amount of split safety, when a safety moves up into the box, I think more often than not, it will be Ransom. And if we've got Ransom up there with the inexperienced Trevin Wallace in front of him, a defense that was historically bad last year stopping the run, it will probably be improved, but not so much so that they're going to all of a sudden be incredibly efficient and be, basically start playing a lot fewer snaps. I don't see that happening. So I think, as we talked before, a lot of snaps, at least average or above average in zone coverage. Bad at run defense. We see this where safeties do a lot of cleanup in that situation. Remember when Jalen Petre blew up that first year because he and a safety partner in the Texans were the last line of defense because the Texans' run defense was so. It wasn't that Jalen Petre was this incredible player. By the way, he's gotten a lot better. He was actually just an average player his rookie year, but nobody was tackling in front of him. So, we love that Christian Rozeboom is up there, and I think he's going to be a solid player, but it's not like this isn't Roquan Smith or Fred Warner. Trevin Wallace, as we just talked about, he's still learning things. I think there's a lot of tackles that are going to get bled to the safety position, and I would rather invest at the very, very end of your draft at Ransom's upside because he's literally free 99 right now.
Yeah, he really is. And I thought you were going to say who's drafted Lathan Ransom at all this year, and I was going to put my hand up because I at least have him out of rookie drafts, right?
Yes.
So I do really like Lathan Ransom. I haven't had the chance to take him in redraft yet,
Right.
but yeah, Nick Scott and Damani Richardson, like they're the competition for him. I'm with you. I really like Ransom. I think he's got strong IDP potential given his play style. He'll rotate down towards the line of scrimmage. Like you said, he could hit really hard. And one of his best strengths is in his run defense. So if he continues to impress in camp like he has, like I think Scott or Richard, whatever his name is, Damani Richardson, should not be like viewed as scary enough to kind of bench in favor of the rookie. Like if you're the Carolina coaching staff, I mean, teams keep giving Nick Scott a chance and then he kind of loses his chance or because he's not good or he can't stay healthy, right? Last year it was what was it? It was, he got injured, I think in week 7 and his season was done. And then in 2023, it was the rookie Jordan Battle with the Cincinnati Bengals eventually overtaking him on the depth chart, right? So if I'm Carolina, I don't know that there's anything Scott did last year while he was healthy to trust him. Maybe it's Damani Richardson who filled in for Scott in the back half of last year, and he was fine, but again, nothing special. So yeah, I don't hate Ransom's chances of emerging like as a starter at some point by any means here, and I think he could be really effective as an IDP for sure. Okay, another safety who I think will be a great IDP value right now, and one that should get an ideal deployment for IDP too. I went with Will Harris of the Washington Commanders. So Harris is set to play what looks like that box heavy role in Dan Quinn's defense this year. This is a role that allowed Jeremy Chin to have that kind of bounce back IDP season last year. He played 41% of his defensive snaps in the box. He finished as a top 20 IDP safety. Like, I think there will be people who are maybe excited about Quan Martin because he's the younger guy and he has the 2023 second round draft capital. But I think for IDP purposes, it's Harris that will want this year. He has both the size, also the experience playing closer to the line of scrimmage in the past, making him, I think, the best bet among the Commanders' current crop of safety options to absorb that box heavy role and become the top IDP target. So, Harris played about 30% of his defensive snaps in the box last season with the Saints. And despite missing time, he still had 75 total tackles, came in well below average in terms of percentage of non-tackle fantasy points as well. So for those wondering why that's worth noting, it's a number that with potentially high variance and can easily bounce in a player's favor on any given season. So for a player who came out on the negative side of that variance in 2024 and is in a prime position for tackles this season, Harris has that kind of winning lottery ticket potential for the position in 2025 should everything kind of come to fruition. And he'll come with a minimal cost to acquire this offseason, which is the best part, right? He's being drafted around safety 50. Like, that is free money there for anyone fading defensive back like you should. So Will Harris, another one of those players that I'm happy to kind of scoop up as a value late in drafts.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to add to that is, you talked about how on paper, it looks like Will Harris should be the one to kind of get those box snaps just based on his usage before, Dan Quinn, Quan Martin, all those sorts of things. And I just want to add that the beat writers, several of them, have noted that, at least while they're watching training camp, that it has been Harris that tends to rotate in the box more than Quan Martin, and Quan Martin will move deep. So it's just great to see what looks like this would be how he should be used, and then we're getting visual confirmation that is exactly how he's being. Now, obviously, just them saying that doesn't guarantee it, or doesn't give us a number to say he's going to spend this many snaps in the box, but it absolutely backs up everything you've been talking about, that it's clear that they're thinking of him in that role. So that visual confirmation here in training camp, to me, just backs this up. And yeah, kind of a similar thing we talked about some of these linebackers. This is, nobody's drafting Will Harris, and you can wait to the end of your draft and have a DB2, and might even be a DB1. But even if you, like I said, I like to draft not assuming the rosiest of possibilities. Right. I like to draft assuming this guy is going to have an average year, an average for him year, based on his trajectory, based on the defense, whatever that is. That just makes me feel like if I get anything above that, it's gravy. If he does what I think would be just an average season, I'm very happy with where I'm drafting him.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, he's not a name that people are going to be drawn to, because he's kind of an unknown for the most part, right? Unless you're a sicko like us who's paying attention to this stuff every single week and diving into the numbers so much. But yeah, like, when it comes to guys like this, especially at safety, right, where every single year, like the turnover at the top of the position scores is wild as any other position in IDP, right? So you're looking at guys who are going to be in the best position to get tackles, who are going to be on the field a ton. And that's kind of your starting baseline. And for me, Will Harris is in a prime position to have that strong tackle production floor that we're looking for. And then, trying to figure out all the variants of big plays and interceptions and all that kind of stuff, that, good luck trying to figure that out. But you start with a good floor, and then you kind of work your way from there. And if you can get this kind of guy at the end of your draft and continue to fade the defensive back or safety position and load up on offense or other more valuable IDPs, then he's kind of the perfect target for me for those late round safeties. Okay, let's move on to the defensive line now. And it's a position where we're going to start and end with some sweat as we work through our picks, because Justin, your first pick here is Tennessee Titans defensive tackle T'Vondre Sweat. Tell us about him.
Well, when you asked about trying to think of some sleepers, I think one of the best places to find them on the defensive line is not on the edge, but actually in the interior. The number of defensive tackles who have moved their way, and this is general DL scoring. The number of defensive tackles who have moved their way into the top 50. I mean, it's way more balanced than it was 5 years ago. Certainly more than 10 years ago. So sometimes finding a good defensive tackle is a good way to do that. So, in kind of just reviewing some of my favorite choices, I keep coming back to T'Vondre Sweat. He's moving into year 2. We see this a lot where you get a rookie, like a talented rookie defensive lineman, takes them a little while to kind of get up to the speed and the strength of the NFL. And in year 2, we see a leap. And then in year 3, we kind of see that big leap. So Sweat is moving into year 2. I think he had a really good season last year. I think he only up with like 50-ish tackles. And it was like that's not an amazing number, but it's a solid number. But I really think he played better than his production shows. And that's the sort of thing I'm looking for when I'm looking for these leap candidates, if you will. I think he's gonna continue to benefit greatly from teams paying more attention to Jeffrey Simmons playing right next to him than him. And this is really going to matter, because I think one of the reasons that Sweat didn't have as big of a fantasy season last year and his rookie year was less about the tackles and more about that he just didn't really have that many big plays. I think this is where we're going to see that bump up a little bit. But even if he doesn't, I think he's going to end up more in the 60-ish tackle range. And for defensive tackle, to me, that's great. He's DL 127 on IDP shows ADP, which he might as well be DL 1 million, right?
Right.
Nobody is drafting him. And if I break that down by defensive tackle, he's defensive tackle 37, right? He's basically undrafted. He's not being drafted. This is a guy kind of like what we talked about with Ransom and some of these other players, where wait to the end of the draft while everyone else is picking up their LB2s and 3s and whatever. You're picking up backup running backs, you're picking up rookie wide receivers, these sorts of things, loading up on offensive lottery tickets, knowing that the Will Harrises of the world and the Tavondre Sweats are going to be back there. Now, in particular, if it's a DT required league, I like Sweat even more, but it is all on paper looking like this is going to be the year where people are going to start talking about Tavondre Sweat, and you'll already have him on your team when that happens.
Yeah, he was great last year, right? Like he was kind of thrust into a pretty heavy workload right out the gate. In year one, he played basically like 700 snaps and he held his own. He had a 76.1 PFF grade. That was 15th best at defensive tackle. 75.0 run defense grade was ninth. And look, he wasn't like amazing as a pass rusher, but that's okay, especially for a rookie defensive tackle. Like he has the time and the opportunity to get there as a pass rusher. And he's not a bad pass rusher, but we see bad pass rushers get sacks all the time. And the best way for that to happen is with tons of snaps. And at the very least, Sweat has already shown to be a good pass rusher and will likely get plenty of snaps once again. So yeah, he's a really fun one. I can't wait to see what he does here in year two. And for DT required, like especially like this could be a really fun player. And I like this call as a potential like breakout candidate and somebody that, yeah, like you said, is free, as free as can get in drafts right now. So for me on the defensive line, I went with Carl Granderson of the New Orleans Saints, a player who I think drafters were excited about last year, but we've kind of cooled on now. And I think he's in a great spot to now be considered a value heading into 2025. So Granderson, he had this kind of breakout season in 2023. He delivered 8.5 sacks and he finished as a top 10 IDP at his position as a result. Heading into 2024, expectations were relatively high for Granderson to deliver similarly, but he unfortunately fell short in the sack column, which ultimately hurt his IDP production and has seemingly scared IDP drafters off from trusting him again. So for IDP drafters who kind of understand the fickle nature of year-to-year IDP production, this is where we can bet on, I think, positive variance favoring good players to create a bounce back in value. And Granderson, he's one of my favorites right now because a lot is kind of going in his favor to outperform his current treatment in drafts. He's being drafted as edge 37 and DL 49, according to the IDP show ADP, including continuing on with his significant expected workload after ranking 6th at the position in pass rush snaps, and he was top 20 in run defense snaps last season. So the best part about that workload is that he also owns a strong pass rush profile, and he posted the best pass rush grade of his career since 2020, that is, with a 70.3, and he set a new career high in pressures as well with 61, which was a top 20 mark for his position. He ranked 90th percentile in expected sacks last season as well. And look, he came up well short of his expected sack totals. That only fuels his potential for positive regression heading into 2025 and can help him kind of crack the top 20 at his position in IDP production. So where Granderson's, I think his potential is boosted even further for IDP, at least this year, is he's not just on the back of playing time, but high-end tackling as well. He ranked 95th percentile in tackles versus expected after leading the position in that regard in 2023. So back-to-back seasons of being one of the best tacklers at the position. So that kind of combination of playing time, tackling ability, and positive expected regression in the sack column makes Granderson kind of an obvious, unique bet to make in IDP drafts this offseason to kind of target while other drafters might be fading him or leaving him out. Because even on D up, when I was doing those drafts, I think it's closed now, but he had a 0% rostership. So he was somebody that I was like, you know what, I'm going to grab him as my 6th round pick, hope that all this stuff comes to fruition, and it makes my roster different from everybody else's as long as the other guys hit as well, and can separate you in such a big tournament like that. So yeah, really like Granderson this year. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff that you already talked about in terms of, looking at that pressure to sack ratio, and we see it every year with players. There is so much variance there. Pressure rate is a more stable metric, and we've been able to accurately predict these sorts of swings. By the way, in both directions, right? Sometimes you'll get these guys who have 12 sacks, and we look at like how he had 30 pressures, like that, and it will happen that way. And so we try to recommend not drafting those guys. And I think there's also, I want to mention 2 other things that I think are also help his situation that you hadn't covered yet. One, I really believe strongly in one of the best ways to give a defensive end more pass rush opportunities and more success is to stick a really good player next to him in the interior. We've seen it time and time again. And now they've got Devon Godshaw, which I think is just a great move for them. I think Godshaw there in the middle is going to help relieve some pressure there, help soak up some double teams. And I do think that'll help a lot. Also, something I think is really going to help, well, it's going to help us. It's not going to really help him, is how horrible the Saints offense is likely to be this year. And so Granderson's I've got him pegged for about 3,500 snaps this year because I'm pretty sure the Saints are going to score 4 points total all year.
Yeah.
So he is likely going to be on the field a lot, which is a lot of pass rush snaps. And remember, obviously we'd like to see him get, hit double-digit sacks, but if he ends up with 7 or 8 sacks and 60 plus tackles and a bunch of tackles for loss, that's cool too. So I think his opportunities are going to rise this year. And I think that alone just gives him more chances. And these are things that are, again, something we've talked a lot about over the years, John, is like stacking opportunities in your favor, right? It's almost like playing poker. You want as many outs as you can. And really, I think Granderson has just a ton of outs staring him in the face.
Yeah, there's a lot of boxes that he checks here as somebody that should have a big year. Again, if he continues on this same trajectory that he finished last year on, which I do believe is a lot of his stable metrics, right? So that's the big thing that kind of helps us feel better about that as well. So yeah, I'm with you. I really like Granderson this year, and I think he can definitely be a great value for us in 2025. So next up, Justin, you've gone with a really fun name here at the defensive tackle position again, and a rookie to boot. So tell us what's got you in on Kenneth Grant of the Miami Dolphins in year 1.
Yeah, I mean, anyone has heard me rant over the years about this time of year, it's how much you should be fading rookie IDPs because they generally do not perform anywhere near as well as it seems, and particularly rookie defensive linemen. It just takes them so long to get going. However, as I look at this, I think Kenneth Grant is going to be that exception. And I want to be clear. I don't see Kenneth Grant finishing in the top 10. He probably is not going to finish in the top 20, right? But again, this is somebody who is not being drafted. Here's the deal. He's most likely going to immediately start in the interior for the Dolphins, right? He's got first round talent. And in particular, I think he has a really strong run game defense. So I thought of him as the best nose in the draft. I'm certainly not alone in that. I'm not some maverick in coming up with that, but this is probably one of the best noses in the draft. He's probably going to play from week 1. And I just think from volume alone, he's going to be a DT2 or DT3 if that doesn't go well for him. But DT3 for somebody you can, if you play 3 2 or 3, let's say you start 2 defensive tackles and you need some some defensive tackles on your bench, I am excited to put Kenneth Grant on my bench. If you play 4 or 5 defensive linemen, I'm excited to have Kenneth Grant on my bench or possibly at the back end of my roster. We just talked about how important it is for defensive linemen to have somebody next to them who the offense is paying way more attention to. And I always like helping people, picture this moment. So it's Tuesday before game day, and the offense is getting together and they're trying to figure out how to play, how to beat this Dolphins defense. They're looking at all the players. They're going to put 2 big red circles around Zach Sealer. Like, we are going to stop him at all costs. Well, guess who plays next to Zach Sealer this season? A guy nobody's going to be paying attention to. And so for that alone, I just think he's going to get a lot of volume, a lot of opportunities. And he's DT 42 right now in an IDP show, ADP. So definitely a late round or at the very, very end of, like, you could literally the very, very last pick grab Kenneth Grant, and he's going to end up with 50 something tackles and 5 to 6 sacks, and that's going to be a great value at the end of your drafts that you can put as a DT2 on your team when you need him.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for snaps for Kenneth Grant right now, because outside of Zach Sealer, it's like Benito Jones and Jordan Phillips, like not exactly, workhorse players at their this point in their careers, right? So I think there's definitely room for him in year one. I like you said, I'm in a few leagues where you start 2 defensive tackles, and Kenneth Grant is absolutely a name that I would be interested in that kind of format, right? I think we'll see what the pass rush upside looks like for him. I think Miami's going to have a lot of packages where it's Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Zach Sealer as their 4 pass rushers on obvious passing downs, if everybody can stay healthy, right? They're not going to be able to run all those guys out there all the time. Kenneth Grant's going to get some run there on the defensive line in passing situations as well. Decent profile coming out of college as well, like especially for a nose tackle. Like, I think that's the important thing here. Like 80th percentile pass rush grade among interior defensive linemen, 78th percentile run defense grade, has good size. Like, if they trust him, there's a good chance he has a nice rookie year. So this was a good shout out for sure. And then another player along the defensive line who I always keep coming back to in terms of potential value, that's Josh Sweat of the Arizona Cardinals. So he is going as edge 34 and DL 42, according to the IDP show ADP. And before, I started even drafting on D up again, his rostership was at like 2% there. So it just stands out as like a, for a guy that is likely a high snap volume edge defender at the very least, right? The way I look at it for, drafters who maybe like to target linebacker heavy starts in drafts, right? Sweat to me is one of the better swings to take on edge if you're not paying attention to that position early, because a little bit later, because he at least comes with a strong production floor thanks to like playing time and tackling ability, but he's also capable of delivering double-digit sacks. We saw that in 2022. He had 11 sacks. So Sweat now reunited with former defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon, with whom he had his best season. That year, he delivered a career-high PFF grade, 86.6, pass rush grade, 82.1, and he had that 11-sack season as well. So he almost immediately becomes the top edge defender on the Cardinals roster, which puts him in play to be on the field for another high-end workload in 2025. Like, over the past 4 seasons, he's averaged 41 defensive snaps per game. I think that should be considered his floor with the Cardinals here in 2025. Then you factor in that heavy workload, and his IDP potential becomes much greater than his DL 40-ish evaluation on both D up and the IDP show ADP. So just last season he ranked 85th percentile in expected sacks. He was 83rd percentile in tackles versus expected. He was a top 25 grade in pass rush, he was edge 26 overall in IDP. So any improvement in production at all from Sweat in 2025 is going to allow him to outperform that finish from last season. But even if he's just delivering, more of the same, Sweat is still more valuable than his current ADP, and kind of like the perfect little late round value to target in drafts here for maybe those shallower leagues, or for leagues where you want to wait on the edge position because you want to load up on linebacker. Like I really like Josh Sweat this year once again here, and I think he's capable of getting back to double digit sacks, but even if not, still a really nice value and productive IDP for us.
One of the things I think that is really important about what you said, which is his expected snap count, right? So when Sweat was with Philadelphia, their philosophy on edge rushers, I did an article on this a couple of years ago. There are some teams who basically say, these are our 4 or 5 or maybe 6 best defensive linemen, and we're going to get every single snap out of these guys we can. And then you have other teams that take a different philosophy. I always call it like rows of shark's teeth. Everyone's going to stay fresh because no one's going to be out there too long. The Buffalo Bills don't have it this year because they just don't have the depth. But the last several years, we've seen 8 or 10 guys on the Buffalo Bills just constantly rotate, and it's great for the Bills defense. The Bills defense loves it. Terrible for IDP because nobody's out there for very long, and that's what Sweat did. I mean, he played with Brandon Graham and he played with all these great defensive linemen for the Eagles. He just didn't play a ton. I mean, he played like 50ish, 60ish% of the snaps. So, he's getting 7 and 8 sacks playing like 600 snaps. If he plays 700 or 800 snaps, I think the most snaps he played was the year he got 11 sacks. And I think on this Cardinals team, he's got a couple of things working for us as his IDP managers. Number one, I think he's going to play more like 70% of the snaps, not high 50s, low 60s. So even just if we assume the same number of snaps from team to team, I think he's going to kind of get in that 700 snap range. But the Eagles defense was so good, and if you have a really good defense, this was always Fred Warner's problem. Mm-hmm. Fred Warner's problem is he would go out there and kill it, and then you look at the end of the week and he's like, oh, he played 52. He played 100% of the 52 snaps this elite 49ers defense had to play. And the rest of the time they sat on the bench eating snow cones because they didn't have anything else to do, right? These great elite defenses often don't play a lot of snaps. So they can't rack up those extra tackles that happen. And I think that's one of the things that happened with the Eagles. They just weren't, their defense was too good, too efficient. Their offense was also too good and didn't allow that the case. That is not going to happen in Arizona. I think we're going to see 11 or 1,200 snaps out of these defenders as opposed to more like 1,000. And those are extra snaps for Sweat. So I think, again, we talked about stacking things in Sweat's favor. I think percentage-wise, he's going to play more. There's who else they have? Justin Jones, and he's on the other side of the ball. Like, there's not a whole lot of people behind him. So his percentage is going to go up. I just think across the board, the team defense snaps will also go up. So that almost doubles his expected, snap increase. And he's a good player. He just was on a really talented team that rotated. So, and I just think all those things light up. The last thing I'm going to say is I'm going to say this will be the third person in a row. It always helps to have great interior linemen. He's got Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson. He's got some really big studs there in the middle. And I don't know when we're going to see guys like Calais Campbell stop playing great football. I don't think it'll be in my lifetime, but he's just going to keep playing forever. But every year I do that with him. And why am I blanking? Cam Hayward, right? I'm like, I'm sure this is no, he's just going to have 70 tackles. Great. I faded him yet again. So these guys are playing great in the middle. That's going to help Sweat all the more.
Yeah, absolutely, man. High volume workload, strong tackler, underrated pass rusher. Like there's a lot here to like about Josh Sweat. But Justin, that's kind of our main list for today. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you while you were here, and obviously since it's fantasy draft season, if there are any other like quick hitter players that you like as potential values this year who could hit big for our IDP drafters.
Man, there's a lot of people that kind of made my list. But some of them are a little bit higher.
Sure.
I will tell you that uh, we just talked about the Arizona Cardinals, and obviously we've talked a lot about them this podcast. But I was just saying, like, who's going to play next to Josh Sweat? Justin Jones is on the other side. Baron Browning. You want to talk about a name? You remember he had a little bit of a breakout there with the Broncos. I think Baron Browning is somebody on the back end that you consider, taking a shot at. Um, Also, Trenton Simpson, again, like kind of like a little bit of a later round pick. Last year he split a lot of snaps and just wasn't fully capable of taking over that position next to Roquan Smith. It does look like that's going to happen this year. So if you need an LB3, I think Trenton Simpson could be a solid LB3 for you. This is certainly not a sleeper, but every year I try to find who I think has the best chance to be that, like, no doubt DL1. Because there's always a whole bunch of candidates. I'm always trying to, like, look for the perfect combination of things for somebody who could move into that category and be like that like breakout, like clear, like the year TJ Watt broke out and things like that. Last year I had that person pegged as Aiden Hutchinson. Again, that's not some stretch, but before last year, people weren't taking him as DL number one, right? They were taking Watt, they were taking Micah Parsons, whatever. This dude had like 7.5 sacks in like the time it took me to make a ham sandwich, right? So shout out to, or pour one out for his broken leg. But to me, as I ramble on about this, when I add all that up this year, that player for me is Jared Verse. So we won't get into the details because I won't go too long. But if you're going to take a shot at DL1 and you want to let the TJ Watts, the Micah Parsons, and the Myles Garretts come off, that next round for me, if I'm drafting in the mid to late rounds for my DL1, I just keep thinking all this is lined up for Jared Verse.
Yeah, I love that call. I won't go into too much detail. We've talked a lot about Jared Verse on this podcast, and we're going to talk about him again next week. But yeah, I'm 100% with you. And speaking of Trenton Simpson too, the Ravens played their preseason tonight, and he was the lone linebacker that, at least through the first 6 drives, he was the lone linebacker that actually stayed on the field while Teddy Buchanan and Jake Hummel kind of rotated at that LB2 spot. So that at least bodes well for Trenton Simpson as well this year as a potential LB2 next to Roquan Smith. If he can hold that role this year, we'll see how it goes. But right now, it looks like he is the favorite still to come back and hopefully get more work than he did last year. And then, like, for me, like, just quick hitters, I really like Deshaun Elliott in Pittsburgh. I think he's somebody that's undervalued, going to be a box heavy role, going to be a full-time role this year. It wasn't last year. Some linebackers, Jack Sanborn in Dallas, another one. We didn't talk about him tonight, but looks like he could be the favorite for the Green Dot in Dallas. D Winters as well in San Francisco, another guy that probably going to play a full-time role or close to it next to Fred Warner in San Francisco. Demetrius Knight Jr. In Cincinnati, the second-round rookie. Once Jermaine Pratt was out of there, we talked about his stock rising. They played a preseason game tonight as well, and Demetrius Knight played an every-down role next to Logan Wilson, while Oren Burks was operating as the base linebacker LB3, which was not a full-time role, of course. So stock up there for Demetrius Knight as well. But yeah, lots of different options we can look at for later in drafts. Make sure to check out the rankings and stuff like that, and we'll cover a lot of these names as the preseason goes on too. So that is going to wrap up things for today. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you please be so kind to like and subscribe on the YouTube, I'd greatly appreciate that. Also a good place to shout out some of your favorite IDP sleepers. Maybe you too can get a shout out on the pod, like number one Christian Rozeboom stand Paper Abyss Comics. A huge thank you to the man Justin Barnes as well for running through this exercise with me every year. Thank you as always, sir.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on. As always, we'll do it again next year. We'll tally up our score next year as well.
Yeah, I gotta remember to check out the list at least before we go again, so we can know which players we talked about and which ones we got right. But yeah, please, before you go, let everybody know what you have going on this year over at Fantasy Points as well.
Yeah, I'm one of a couple of IDP analysts over there at Fantasy Points. So I'll be doing a lot of the IDP stuff, articles, etc. The other thing is my main role this year there is going to be continuing to focus on betting. We've had a good little run here, exploiting some soft spots as these betting sites don't quite understand how tackles work, and people like me and John have spent the last who knows how many thousands of hours trying to figure that out for our fantasy teams. Now we're finding a way to make a little extra pizza money off of it. So focusing on that. And any questions you guys have, you can always find me on Twitter at Down with IDP.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, definitely go check out Justin's work if you haven't already. And if you have, you know how good it is. So make sure to follow him as well. As for me, I'll be back, I guess early next week, I think, with preseason week 1 IDP recap, because we're back, right? It's preseason here. This is the swing of it. This is crunch time heading into the NFL season. We'll also be back next week talking dark horse IDP ones with the legend that is Adam Markham. So again, thank you for tuning into this one. Don't forget to take advantage of the PFF Plus early bird sale. And until next time, peace out.